Hey guys, it's Ann Yorks from the Flower Box, and I have a Valentine's cookie tutorial for you today. This cookie tutorial is Love is in the Air. I'm going to show you how to make 5 beautiful cookies that are super approachable with a really easy color palette. I'm making this beautiful hot air balloon with marbling. We're going to make a stenciled cloud that says love is in the air. I'll show you several wet on wet decorating techniques with the mini heart and this cute little arrow with the polka dots and fun love design. Let's cookie it up. This cookie kit is inspired by the cookies I designed for my book, The Crafted Cookie. This is the Love is in the Air set, and it has the arrow, the hot air balloon, and the cloud. So I added a few more designs and put some video to it so that you can see step by step how to do this. You can find that book on flowerbox.com, and I'm still signing all the books that are purchased through our site, so check it out. Okay, let's get started with this hot air balloon. We're going to outline the large balloon section and the basket section using light pink and white piping icing with tip number 2. Now we're ready to start the flooding on the hot air balloon. This takes a little bit of effort to set up, but then the hard work is done. So we're going to start with adding these light pink stripes of icing. I found 3 stripes of the light pink and 3 stripes of the dark pink really fit perfectly and looked beautiful when the cookie was all done and dry. Now, if it helps, you can draw lines on your cookies just to get those even sections, or you can eyeball it like I did and it gets pretty close. Now, before we marble the icing, I'm going to add one more pop of color, just a little white highlight line in between the transitions of each of those colors. That will just maximize the marbling as we pull our tool down through that wet icing. Now, I'm using the yellow Boo Boo stick that's included in the Love is in the Air cookie decorating kit. You can find that kit also on flowerbox.com, and I'm just using the tip to gently pull down those lines just to create those beautiful sections of that hot air balloon. It is fun and easy to do, and it looks so impressive. So I hope you have a blast creating your hot air balloons. I could see those coming together in lots of different colors for a beautiful sky. Okay, so once you've flooded in the white basket and let that cookie dry for about an hour in front of a fan, it is time to add the details. I have tip number 2 on my white piping icing bag, and I'm going to start those scallops off. I'll do the center scallop first, and then as I bring out the right and the left, I'm adding 2 more scallops on each side. They're getting smaller, and I sort of bring them down a little bit at an angle just to give a little bit of perspective to that balloon like it is a round balloon. Now let's create that beautiful texture on the basket. This is called a basket weave technique, and I'm going to outline the basket first. Then I'll add 1 vertical line and pipe 3 short horizontal lines over that line. Then I just want to repeat that pattern as I move across the cookie. Now, it is important to be using piping icing for this. If your icing is too thin, those little lines will start running together and it'll create a little bit of a mess on the surface of the cookie. So make sure your icing is thick enough to do this technique. Once you get to the end, just fill in those extra little spaces like that basket weave is wrapping around with a short line of pipe. And while that icing is still wet, add 1 little light pink pearlized sprinkle to the front of that basket just to bring all those Valentine vibes to this cookie. Now we're almost done. We're going to just add the connection between the balloon and the basket. We'll have 2 in the background, and then we'll add 2 in the foreground. That's pretty easy to do. I'm using black icing with tip number 2. I hope you love making these beautiful hot air balloons this Valentine's Day. The banner cookie cutter is such a fun addition to this set. Let me show you how to outline and flood. First, I'm just adding 2 dark pink hearts in the top corners, and then I'm going to outline the entire section using that turquoise blue icing. And this, you can flood in this entire area like I'm going to do today. That makes this design much simpler, or you could section off this banner into individual sections if you're personalizing or putting letters on there. I've used this banner a couple times, but this is the easiest way, just to flood in that entire section. Now once that has a chance to dry, flood in those little hearts, and then we're going to add some of these Valentine sprinkles. These are cute pink pearlized hearts. They taste like vanilla, and you can find a jar of these hearts in the cookie decorating kit. So we're just going to flood in the hearts on the banner and then add that little sprinkle just to add a quick touch of detail. Now for this design, I am going to be adding text, so I've sized my tip down to a 1.5, and I'm adding the text just as a block style letter. Notice I'm adding serifs to the letters, and I do pipe a second line just to add a thick and thin area to the letter. Now I'm not using a projector when I add this text. For 4 letters, I can tough it out and freehand it, but any much more than that, I would use a projector to add this text. Now once those letters are outlined, I'm just going to flood in those thick areas just to give something interesting about these letters, and that's it. So it's not too difficult when you take those letters step by step, but like I said, once you get more letters than that, or if you're doing cursive, then sometimes it does become necessary or just a lot easier to use a projector. Now let's take a look at the arrow. Instead of following the shape of the cookie, I'm going to make this a Valentine's arrow, and so the point of that arrow is actually a heart shape. I'm going to outline the feather detail, and I'm using tip number 2 on all of my outlines. Now using a really light squeeze, I'm adding little itty bitty dots to that wet pink icing just to create that fun pattern on the tip of the arrow. Those flood icings are the same consistency, so it just melts down flat and creates one flat icing surface. Flood in that feather detail, and then you're ready to let that cookie dry. After it has a chance to dry, come back and add some details. Now you can add just a straight line on the arrow, or you can add the piped word love in cursive like I did. Adding those lines on the back side of the arrow, I'm still using tip number 2. I'm using tip number 2 throughout this entire video just to keep things simple. And I'm just adding those short lines as I go across the cookie. Then I'll fill in any of that negative space between those lines using the light pink icing. Let's take a look at some of the wet on wet designs that you can do with royal icing. This is one of the really fun parts of decorating cookies with royal icing. So I'll show you a couple of those on these mini heart cookies. The first one is a stripe. So I flood the base in turquoise, then using really light hand pressure, also using flood icing, I'm going to add those stripes. They just melt down flat and create one flat surface on the icing of the cookie. Now we're going to marble. This is similar to what we just did on the hot air balloon. Again, I'm adding the flooding icing in white to the background, adding stripes in light and dark pink, and then I have my boo-boo stick. I'm gonna run that stick up and down through the icing just to create that pretty marble pattern. This is the perfect technique for an accent cookie like a mini cookie. Now you could use piping icing to outline these cookies. That wouldn't be wrong, but I find because these cookies are so small, it's just a lot faster and easier to use my flood icing bag for both the outline and the flood. Now a bottle of those pearlized pink sprinkles are included in the Love is in the Air kit. So let's add a couple of those to this pink heart. And while that pink icing is still wet, I'm also going to add some little itty bitty icing dots in turquoise and white just to create that fun Valentine's party mini heart. Here's our last design. I'm flooding the base in light pink and adding a medium-sized dot in the dark pink. Now, as I'm adding those dots, you can see they're just melting into that base icing to create that flat surface. While this icing is still wet, pull the tip of your boo-boo stick down through the center of those dots. It just drags that icing through and creates those small little heart shapes. This little foursome makes the perfect cookie pack for Valentine treats, whether in a classroom or for a friend. Let's take a look at the stenciled cookie. That's the cloud cookie. So I'm outlining the cloud in white using piping icing and tip number 2. And then I'm going to flood in generously across the surface of the cookie. Notice I'm not leaving any cookie showing because I want a puffy, flat surface when that icing is dry. We want it to be completely flat so that when we stencil on the surface of the icing, we don't want any icing to get caught if there is a dip in the icing. So flood generously to get a nice full and flat look when dry. Now I'm scraping thick pink icing across the surface of the stencil. I'm just trying to make sure that I'm covering each of those letters, each of those hearts, and then I'll gently peel back that stencil to reveal the words "Love is in the Air." That looks awesome. For a beginner, it could also be helpful to use a stencil genie to keep that stencil in place. The stencil genie is a frame that would hold the stencil in place while you do the stenciling. It's another great way to do this. I'm adding a quick outline in turquoise and then 2 little accent hearts down at the base of the cloud. I hope you enjoyed watching this really fun Love is in the Air cookie tutorial. If you're looking for the decorating supplies, you can find this kit on flowerbox.com, as well as the book The Crafted Cookie, which has more photos and written instructions for 3 of the cookies in this video. I cannot wait to share with you a year of cookie decorating videos. So come again soon, subscribe, and be notified when we post our next tutorial. Until then, happy decorating!